Good morning to everyone and to Tor. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to acquaintances, businessmen and authorities of the World Economic Forum who have come to Buenos Aires to hold this meeting. I know that some have come from far away to hear and see firsthand everything that Argentina has to offer. Allow me to tell you that you will be disappointed at home, either because of the policies against the private sector or because of the lack of interest in promoting foreign investments that previous administrations had. It is not very common for our country to host this type of event, where direct foreign investment is formed and promoted. Know that from the beginning until the end of our management, we will advocate that this type of meetings continue, as well as we will work tirelessly for a country with a free and open economy to investment. I take this opportunity to tell you that, although my first speech in Davos is taken on some global notoriety, I am not here today to talk about the course that the world has adopted, but rather to tell you about the course that Argentina has adopted since we took office. 10 months ago, almost 15 million Argentines decided to leave behind the policies that impoverished our country for more than 100 years, to begin to apply the ideas of freedom, which are the only ones that guarantee growth and progress. I do not want to go into something that we have all heard many times, but the impoverishing model of the state that Argentina implemented for so many years left us a country in ruin, where more than half of Argentines are poor, and with a per capita GDP that did not grow for almost 15 years ago. You are right, though. He is saying that they do not offend dogs, saying that they would dogs, the previous ones. When we took office, the permanent deficit was unsustainable, and there was unbearable emission that all our predecessors had maintained. It was unsustainable, and we were on the way to hyperinflation. In addition, in the social dimension, we had established a caste system that divided politicians and their friends from the rest of society, where a few privileged people won at the expense of all Argentines. Imagine how bad things had to be for society to elect the first liberal and libertarian president in history, something that in normal conditions of depression and temperature does not happen, right? Without a political party near the governors or mayors. It is something that could not have happened if it were not for the absolute economic, material and moral failure of the caste model. But today I do not come here to talk about what the others did, but about what we are doing and will continue to do. We assumed the government and decided to return to the foundations. We're correcting the macroeconomic order, whatever it costs, so that Argentines can live without inflation for the first time after decades. And we are returning to the state its primary function, which is the defense of life, liberty and the property of individuals, so that the private sector can generate wealth for itself. In other words, we are implementing the same ideas that 90% of the world's population of poverty has come up with in the last 300 years. It will not be easy. We have the failure to rebuild the political, legal, institutional, productive and commercial reputation of a country that has been punished by unscrupulous and British politicians for too long. That is why we start as underdog. We have to aspire to the highest. And that is why the compass of this regime change points to a very clear long-term goal: to be the freest country in the world. Along that line, we are building a new Argentina on three fundamental pillars: an orderly macroeconomy anchored in tax equilibrium, a titanic effort to deregulate the entire Argentine economy that we have called the Great War against the Argentine cost, that we have here our colossal minister and world example, who is Feder Kirchner, and thirdly, the recovery of the rule of law and the fulfillment of the law, where the wonderful Minister Boric every day is in charge of putting the security issues in order. In the campaign, we already warned about the importance of tax equilibrium in our management. On December 10, we reaffirmed our commitment, knowing that tax equilibrium is the basis of economic stability, and a stable, predictable economy is attractive for investments and consumers. In these 10 months of government, we achieved the first tax surplus, sustained by the default labor, of the last 123 years in Argentina, in a turn of events without precedents, throughout and across the planet. The economists who told us it was impossible, that we did not have an economic plan, went through the last 10 months, trying to return to deficit spending to destabilize us, and we did not give them the pleasure. The result of that effort for all Argentines is that the value of our bonds has doubled, and we lowered the country's risk from 3,000 points to less than 1100, and we will continue to lower it, and we will achieve it sooner or later to return to being an emerging country in the credit rating. And I am strongly committed, because at some point in our management, we will be able to return to being an investment credit. Argentina is worth again, because we have a government that, for the first time in decades, is doing what no one wanted to do, and that professed to say uncomfortable truths, then comfortable lies. It is no coincidence that we have new investments announcements every day, and that the RIGI announcements, which is a special investment regime that we have sanctioned, is already around $50,000 million, while the rest of the political parties are dedicated to putting a stop to individual freedoms, with nefarious results. We came to put a stop to it. Yes, a stop to the state, forever. That is to say, a stop to the state. We are going to put the stop to the state, and it is precisely the drastic reduction of the public spending that we are carrying forward that will allow us to return it to the private sector, the product that the state stole from it. Without going further, this Monday we dissolved the Federal Administration of Public Income, a super-politicized state organization that was used to persecute the private sector, and we created a new imposition, cutting off 34% of its structure. In other words, we lowered the expense by cutting off those who collect. Returning the idea of putting a stop to the state is why we are fighting day by day our own battle of firm affiliate with 6 senators, 39 deputies, and the voice of millions of Argentines. They support us on the street and in the networks against the great apparatus of the state party, nobility forces. I would also like to thank the sector of political management that does not seek to guarantee fights, but seeks a real change for the country of his children, and supports us by supporting our vets and our reforms to guarantee fiscal balance and economic growth. There is another sector of political management, a sector that only wants nothing to change, a sector that wants to continue protecting its privileges at the expense of all Argentines. The opposition Carrancho said that we were leaving in January. He said that we were leaving by Holy Week. He said that we were leaving by June. And now they do not know where to go, because the motorway is still more on fire than ever. Secondly, we are carrying out a plan of most ambitious structural reforms, a history to get the state first out of the throat of those who produce, those who trade, and those who work, to reduce the cost of economic activity in all its dimensions. We have called to this initiative the war against the Argentine cost. Every day our regulation ministries eliminate a trap or deactivate a job, as if they were working in an anti-bomb squad. By doing a quick recap, we already eliminate bureaucratic traps for the import and production of steel, aluminum, construction materials, plastic and synthetic silage. In addition, we simplify the export procedures, reducing the delay from 30 days to 1. We eliminate all discretionary controls to imports, including the ferry share system that existed as a de facto mechanism of the state, and we still have hundreds of thousands of traps to disarm. We are also reducing the cost of labor, resulting in more people that can enter the system and thus achieve personal growth for the first time in their lives. In turn, we are lowering the ancillary costs of the ferry's import substitution system that, at the cost of benefiting a handful of privileged, punish the whole of society with goods and services of worse quality at a high price. The last of the 3 points I mentioned, and not less important, is that of the restoration at the state of law in Argentina. I say restoration because, despite what the fetishists say of democratic rituals, the state of law has not existed in Argentina for decades. The state of law is a concept that is based on the fundamental idea that all citizens have inalienable natural rights, among which is the right to life, liberty, and property. Under that premise, the function of the state of law throughout history has been to restrict the power of the monarch so that it cannot trample the natural rights of men. I think it is not necessary to say that in Argentina, and you know it better than many, for about 100 years, the state has violated those natural rights systematically in countless ways. Under the pattern of democracy, the worst atrocities have been committed in our country. It is far from defending the state of law. What is perished in Argentina is the state reason, that is, the need of the state, to help of the natural rights as citizens. Since the failure of the Supreme Court of Justice, which valued asymmetric pacification in 2004, until the impositive abuses at the banking and retention that the provinces do, the examples of violations of fundamental rights have been occurring throughout our history. The right to life, liberty and property have been systematically violated, both by Argentinians and by foreigners who have decided to come and invest here. In summary, the political class needed to violate rights so that the system remains. Justice is wrought under the doctrine that there is nothing more important than the survival of the state, and that all the rights of citizens are subject to that. While they advocate for the famous welfare state, they do nothing but fight for the welfare of the state. We are the first government in decades to impose the rights of citizens above the needs of the state, and we are the first government in decades that is also withdrawing the state from the private sphere of citizens to return to live in a state of full rights. That is to defend the institutions. That is to defend the republic. That is to defend citizens. Returning to all management, our hypothesis has been proven and continues to be proven day by day. In less than a year, we have already reached the lowest inflation in the last 4 years, with prices in different sectors that have not moved for months. In other words, we have carried forward the greatest adjustment in the history of humanity, and we have not lost a pinch of social support. The tax return during these months has already returned 15 points at the GDP to the private sector in the form of savings. They continue on this path of adjustment is what allows the finance of private investment, which is the one that generates genuine growth, because the private sector is based on voluntary relations to grow, and no one voluntarily accesses what is not advantageous for them. Above all, we carry out this adjustment without touching social spending. In fact, we doubled in real terms the direct benefits, such as universal child support and the food card, and we take away the power of the slave pickers, because we understand that is the human capital that will make this nation great again. This, together with an excellent direction of Dr. Patricia Boric, in the face of the security of our nation, is allowing us to recover the public order at high speed, ending with the plagiarism of the pickers. In a few months, we have even pacified Rosario and drug addict. In record time, the effects of the birthday are noticeable. Sorry, but life is like that. The cut to the state that we promised was not only in terms of spending, but also in terms of power over individuals. Either hand of the Basic Law and the Executive Order 7023, we have carried out the largest structural reform in history, which is 8 times bigger than the minimum reform. This allowed us to have a jump of almost 90 points in the economic freedom ranking, and we will not stop until we become the freest country in the world. That is why we still have 3,200 reforms in inquiry. We are doing our duty at the pace that reality allows us. We know that recovering trust is not something that is done overnight. Not at all. The saying says that trust goes up the ladder and goes down the elevator. Argentina has been breaking its word for 100 years, and the world has been burning with milk for 100 years. It is no coincidence that the Argentine population has chosen its president, a guy who 3 years ago was in the private sector. It is because he knows that in the private sector, if your word is not valid, you do not get anywhere. While politics, the lower your reputation, the higher the ladder goes. As I told you, with macro stability achieved after decades, and the efforts of regulatory and the economic opening carried out through the Basic Law and other instruments, we are generating a perfect storm in conditions for any investment. Let me stop in some sectors. In particular, Argentina has a blessed soil with abundant and varied natural resources. Let's look at the energy sector. Vaca Muerta is a source of extraordinary resources, the second largest reserve in the world. At least it can supply the Argentine demand for the next 150 years. Its development has started to reverse our historical energy deficit of almost $7 billion 10 years ago to surplus of $4 billion in the first half of this year. The energy deficit is practically a thing of the past, and we still have a lot to grow. Thanks to the Basic Law, we managed to modify the old laws of hydrocarbon and gas so that, among other things, exporting becomes easier and faster. Let's look at mining. It is estimated that the Andes mountain range has 40% of the world's copper reserves. Without going further, Chile exports $50 billion per year in copper. GE believe that God alone blessed that side of the mountain range and let on the side there is magically nothing. So we have a huge mining potential in copper even for being used. We also have the third largest lithium reserve in the world, with a dozen projects either already producing or coming from the exploration stage, as well as silver and gold exploitation. To that we must add the development of the primary sectors, in which Argentina is already a spearhead, but his potential was crushed for decades by the extractive regime that used them as a source of money to finance the wealth of friends. I'm referring, of course, to the agricultural and industrial sectors. Our field produces food for 500 million people, but the agro is not just a hacienda, the grain of soy, corn and wheat. It is also its derived products. It is also the productive technology, both in genetics and in machinery, in which Argentina is vanguard, and it is also other sectors in which we are already protagonists, such as mania in Cordova, or lemon in Tucumán, and others that are still a potentiality. Do you know how much Chile exports in cherries? 50 times more than Argentina. Not 50 times more. Do you know how much Chile exports in salmon per year? $6 billion. Us? Well, thank you. Imagine all the potential that there is. And finally, the sector of innovation and technology. The Argentine people are privileged in human capital because almost 100 years of collectivism taught us something. It is that the Argentines have the capacity to get water out of the stearins and persevere even in the worst conditions. Or do you think it's a coincidence that despite being the country or the region with the lowest foreign investment in the last 15 years, we are at the same time the one that has the most unicorns per capita? Well, imagine what the technological sector can achieve, especially in stable macroeconomic conditions and without the vote of the state in the neck. As I have said on some other occasion, there is no force in nature greater than an Argentine wanting to get ahead. That is why we want to make an Argentina an artificial intelligence hub, because we have cheap energy in cold places and with high land extensions to develop and supply the centers of computers, and because we have something that in the next decades will be appreciated: faith and optimism in technological development, faith and businessmen, and the regulatory freedom that faith corresponds to, in a world in which every day they encourage more than the private sector, and especially the technological sector, to close before winning the elections. We knew that Argentina was a country where everything was about to be done. And since we assumed office December 10 last year, we began to transform this present decadence that they left us into a future of prosperity for every of the individuals who inhabits this land. The model of freedom that we are applying is not exclusive to the Argentines. It is also an example for the rest of the countries of the region, which to a greater or less extent have also been punished by the same miserable policies of the 21st century socialism. Open ourselves to the world, generate investment opportunities, and allow those who must generate wealth, that is you, the private sector, to do so without being suffocated by the vote of the state. This is the example that we want to give, as cooperation is fundamental. In this new chapter that we are writing, we invite you to retake the initiative that the state unfairly stole from you for so long. Again, I thank you for the trust and interest that Argentina, as a strategic partner of yours. Our commitment is to make Argentina the freest country in the world, for us, for our children, and for all the men in the world who decide to inhabit Argentine soil. Argentina will be free. Argentina will be great again. Thank you very much. Long life freedom, Caraja. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank the words of the President of the nation in this strategy meeting about Argentina at the World Economic Forum. Thank you all. Thank you very much.